Hello, you're watching Avenue X, and this is another video in the series of videos Avenue X is gonna make talking about things related to Black Myth Wukong the game. In this video, I am going to introduce you to the rather complicated but quite interesting cosmology of Journey to the West, 西游记. If you want to know more about the origin of the book and the main characters featured in the book, please check out my previous two videos I've recently made. In a very generalized form, the worldview, the cosmology of 西游记 is a mixture of Confucius belief and morals that applies to how the human society functions, then a mixture of Buddhism and Taoism when it regards the supernatural beings. There are pure Buddhism characters, there are pure Taoism characters. Then there are characters that actually mix both religions into one. As many of figures in Buddhism eventually got adapted into Chinese traditional culture and becomes a part of the colloquial and folklore. So 西游记 would also represent that form of understanding of the world. I'm gonna first talk about a couple of essential concepts and then talk about the Buddhism figures, then the Taoism figures, and then the mixed together figures. Before that though, we have to talk about a couple of essential concepts of beings you will see in 西游记 Journey to the West and also in the game Black Myth Wukong. And they are 妖, Jing, Guai, Mo, Gui, Xian, Shen. Each represents one or multiple forms of supernatural beings other than human beings. And the relationship between them can get really complicated, and you don't have equivalent, for example, in English, that points to each character and exactly what they mean. In the game Black Myth Wukong, you will see for the convenience sake, they would pretty much name all the supernatural animal formed bosses as 妖怪 or Guai. And that's totally fine in Chinese, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. With all those characters, we have to start with one character, Jing. Literal meaning of this character can be essence, can even mean somebody who is super clever and quick, depending on where you put the character and in what word. In terms of being supernatural beings, Jing often refers to anything, animal, plants, even inanimate object, because they're old enough and they've cultivated long enough, they form a sort of consciousness that's akin to humans. So you can be a mouse who's lived 100 years and learn to transform into human. You would be a mouse Jing. You can be a tree that has gone through a similar process, and you can also be a tree Jing. Then Yao and Guai would be built upon this idea. Yao, its original meaning is something that is abnormal. Guai, its original meaning is something that's strange. So if you're abnormal and strange, you can be Yao Guai. As it goes to the special creatures that turn into humans, usually Guai is lesser powerful. You would see most of those creatures in the game that you play as your enemies, they're all Guai. But then the bigger ones can be called Yao. Technically, actually, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, a stone monkey, is a big Yao. So the most general way of thinking about that is everybody can be a Jing if you can transform into humans when you're not human and you have superpowers. Then if you don't have super strong power, you're a Guai, and then you are really powerful, then you're a Yao. But those are separating those characters and giving them very specific definition. When in colloquial contemporary Chinese language, often we use two character words to mean one thing. So what you would often see is calling a Yao Yao Jing or calling a Yao Yao Guai. So Yao Guai, Yao Jing both means a form of Yao. And if you really have to tell what's the difference between them, I'd say because the character itself means strange in Guai. So Yao Guai often refers to the type of supernatural beings from animals or plants who don't really look very pleasant, maybe a bit scary. Whereas Yao Jing often refers to the ones that look really pretty, like a female night-tailed fox or flower demon. And these are the three most important, I'd say, beings you would come across in 西游记. They are often the enemies of Sun Wukong who would have to go and conquer and beat them up. And in a way, you can say it's very anthropocentric. Because the stories are written from human perspectives, you always think of human as the, if not ultimate goal, at least a very important signpost on your way of cultivation. Then Gui, ghost, is pretty straightforward. Ghost as in English, meaning dead people or dead beings that still kind of exist in a spiritual form. Then Mo, sometimes translated in English as evil or devil. which means a state of being. So you don't have to limit that to any particular type of beings, for example, human or animal or trees. Anything can become a more, even a deity or a devas or a gods or immortals, if they are in this bad mode. Then we're left with the good ones, Xian and Shen. Often you can call them gods, immortals, deities, depending on which word you prefer. But in Chinese beliefs, there are essential differences between Xian and Shen. And actually, there are two sets of different interpretations. So let's start with Xian. Xian is anything that cultivates to a level that allows them to gain a form of immortality, and they usually belong to the higher realms. They can go up to the celestial palace, they have powers, and they're good. So a human can cultivate and become a Xian. A Yao can cultivate and become a Xian. And it's a state that you can gain even if you're born not as it. Whereas Shen often is, when you're first born, you are already a Shen. And Shen is related to very old mythology, such as who is the first Shen that created the universe. In Chinese mythology, that would be Pangu. Or the Shen Nu Wa, the woman body and snake-tailed god who created human beings. So those level of really ancient beings who are super powerful, and they're born that way. They didn't cultivate to get there. They just are Shen. And that's one system of distinguishing Xian and Shen. And then there's another system that kind of came later in time in Chinese folk beliefs, which is Xian cultivate to the level of reaching immortality, but then they don't really get a proper post in the celestial palace official bureaucracy system. And then if you become a Shen, you basically get a position. Like, for example, you are in charge of all the rainfalls. You're in charge of taking care of the crops and make sure there's yield. You're in charge of time. You're in charge of something. These two systems exist at the same time, so you can kind of apply and mix them together. So, Jing, Yao, Guai, Mo, Gui, Shen, Xian. These are the basic words you would have to understand what they refer to, and then you dive into Chinese mythology and it will make life a lot easier for you to understand who is who. Then, when we go to the upper realm, we have Buddhism and Taoism. First, let me introduce you to the essential Buddhism characters. I do intend to make later videos on each individual chapter of the game. During those chapters, I'm going to go into details about all the characters that show up and who they are in relation to the lore of the original novel, but also mythology. So I won't be mentioning everybody here. I would only be mentioning high-frequency reoccurrence characters you will see in COG. And I want to first introduce you to a very quick cosmology concept of Buddhism. Buddhism would consider there are 6 paths in the reincarnation cycle, the wheel, the samsara. Within the wheel, you do good things, you get good karma and credits, and then next time you get reborn, you go to a better place, either become a richer, more powerful person, or you can level up to become powerful beings other than humans. From top down, starts with first the level of the celestial beings, or in its original name, devas. Then the second level down is the warlike demigods. They're called asura. Then one level down would be our human realm. And these 3 consist of the 3 good paths. You have enough happiness and non-suffering for you to be able to at least breathe and not constantly feel pain. Whereas once you go to the 3 lower paths, things are getting increasingly harder. So the one below humans are animals. Then the level below is hungry ghosts. Supposedly, if you end up as a being of that realm, then you are constantly hungry. And what you eat always turns into dust in your mouth. So you're constantly seeking food, you're hungry all the time, you still never get satisfied. In that level of pain, you don't have any time and spared, let's say, brain power to think about cultivations. You get trapped there for a long time. Then the lowest level is hell. Hell has many different levels, and there are like better hells than worse hells and the worst hells. Buddhism actually go into detail about the different levels of hell, what suffering awaits there, and they're pretty bad. So, as long as you're not enlightened, you're always in this cycle. Sometimes you're in the better path, sometimes you're in the lower. Even if you've done a lot of good things, you go very, very high up. Up there, you can live a long time, but it's very hard to accumulate more good credits because you're in such a good environment. Everything is good, therefore there's no sort of credits for you achieving things. Once you use up your good credits, you kind of fall down straight away, and then usually it's not good. So in Buddhism's term and in Buddhism belief, even when you are a deva and you're enjoying all the riches and power, it's not a good thing because eventually it's going to run out. You should strive for enlightenment, which is jumping out of this reincarnation cycle. Every time you climb a level, you become more and more enlightened in a bodhisattva journey until eventually you hit Buddha. And there's about 52, I believe. 51 plus last one is Buddha. So Buddha is the ultimate 52. And then before that is like level, all the way up to Buddha. So that's the basic idea about Buddhism in terms of the cosmology. Having that as our background, let's talk about the essential Buddhism characters you will see in the book 西游记. There are 2 Buddhas and 1 Bodhisattva who shows up all the time. So I will focus on introducing them in this video. First, the Buddha, the tradition of Chinese language for the last couple of centuries, also in the book 西游记. This Buddha is called 如来佛, which technically it's a mistake of titles because 如来 and 佛 are 2 different titles of Buddha. Every Buddha, which there are many actually, has the same 10 titles. If you achieve full enlightenment, you become a Buddha. You naturally have 10 titles. In Chinese, from the Sanskrit translation would be 如来应供 正遍知明行足善事世间解无上师调御丈夫天人师佛世尊. And there are also according English translations, I'll put it up there. Therefore, 如来佛 is really Buddha because the Chinese language is so condensed and short for the words compared to original Sanskrit in terms of how many syllables you have. 如来 is only 2 and then 佛 is 1. People just find one word is too short, they would say 如来佛, which literally is just Buddha. And if in Chinese contemporary language you hear anybody say 如来佛, it is actually referring to our Buddha. The Buddha that was born as a human in our timeline about 2005 to 600 years ago in ancient India as a prince and eventually become the Sakyamuni Buddha. If it's any Buddha from other worlds, it will have a different title as Samsam Fo. And in Buddhism, one Buddha teaches a limited zone in the universe, time and space-wise. And there are countless Buddhas spread out of, you can say galaxies or even multiple universes. So in our particular zone where Earth is, it is under, still currently, the Sakyamuni Buddha's teaching. By the time all his teaching on this planet has been lost and nobody remembers his name and his teachings, that will be the end of his period of teaching. And then there will be a period where there's no Buddhism on planet Earth, supposedly. And then afterwards, a new Buddha would be coming in. And that's the second Buddha that's important to 西游记. But let me quickly talk a little bit more about our current Buddha. You can refer to my earlier videos talking about who is Sun Wukong. And he is the Buddha who made a bet with the monkey, say, if you can jump out of my palm, and he couldn't. He got trapped under the Buddha's hand. And he is also the destiny where our journey to the West path would eventually arrive at and getting Buddha's teaching from. That is 如来佛, also 释迦牟尼, Sakyamuni Buddha. Then the next Buddha, and arguably even more interesting, a character in both Journey to the West and also in Buddhism beliefs. In Chinese, this Buddha is called 弥勒佛. This comes from the pronunciation of the Buddha Maitreya. And Maitreya is actually a word that has many origins of many ancient beliefs in this world, including the concept of a Messiah. You would also find traces of Maitreya in the Iranian deity ancient time belief of the god of light called Mithra. So if you search in ancient lores and very old civilizations on planet Earth, talking about a person who will eventually be coming and save everybody out of misery and bring peace and perfection to our world, that future comer often is referred to with this word that sounds like Maitreya or Messiah or something. This is definitely not a single occurrence that's only exclusive to Buddhism. The word probably existed long before Buddhism. And in Buddhism, there's actually very accurate description of where this Buddha, the future Buddha, right now is, and then when he's gonna come. Supposedly he's gonna come at a time when the world is almost golden age and perfect, and everybody lives to like 84,000 years old, which is, well, I can't imagine what it's like then. But supposedly the world is almost perfect already, and this Buddha will be coming. As for where 弥勒佛right now is, on the 4th level of heaven or celestial heaven, where there are 28 in total in Buddhism, on the 4th one, not a very high one, the inner court, So that heaven supposedly has an outer layer where normal deities of that level exist. But if they are not enlightened enough, they cannot get into the inner layer, where inner layer is where the Mila Maitreya Buddha is right now. Not yet a Buddha, but because he is going to be the next Buddha, so you can still call him a Buddha. So he's a Bodhisattva / Buddha, the quantum zone of being which one. When it's right time for him to come to Earth, he will be coming with all those students and then enlighten everyone. So that's belief in Mi Le Fo. And during Tang Dynasty, where the book is set, not written, set, Mi Le belief is the most well spread and having the biggest amount of population believing in branches of different practices of Buddhism in China. Even the Tang Xuanzang, the monk that our Journey to the West story is based on, he personally practices the belief of the future Buddha. So he would be praying and then meditating and chanting in hope of when he passes, he literally goes to the fourth level, the inner court of the heaven, learn from Buddha directly there and eventually come back to Earth, save everybody. Therefore, in the story, 西游记, you will see this Buddha shows up multiple times. Most importantly, in the story of Huang Mei, the yellow brow, which is the main bad character in our third chapter of the game, Black Myth Wukong. And the little Buddha who's dressed in yellow is the yellow brow, who is actually a servant to the real Mila Buddha, who is the little Buddha in the dark colored robe. One interesting thing about this Buddha is its initial imagery in Buddhism is like any bodhisattva, and then later it changed into this happy monk with a very big belly and laughing, and you will see that in the game as well. And if you go to any Buddhism temple within China, the first building you're going to come across usually hosts Mila Buddha's statue as this big-bellied laughing Buddha. The reason for that was during Wu Dai Shiguo, which is a period after Tang Dynasty, before Song Dynasty, a chaotic period, there was a monk who's very well known called Qi Ci, and he is quite legendary. There are a lot of very mystical things surrounding this figure. He is fat with a big belly and he holds a bag on his back. He has left some clues, riddles for people later to figure out, and then for the Buddhism community to eventually all agree that he is the incarnation of Mila Buddha. Then Chinese people started to adopt this look and decided to, from then on, sculpt Mila Fo into this monk's look. And obviously the game takes on our later interpretation and imagery of this Buddha and created the little baby Buddha with a big belly. Then we have to talk about the third most important Buddhism character who shows up all the time, who orchestrated the whole journey to the West for our main pack of characters, Guan Yin Pusa, or Guan Yin Pusa. Initially, she's called Guan Yin, but because it's during Tang Dynasty and there was an emperor called Li Shiming in ancient time, if you have an emperor whose name has one character or two characters, usually you're not allowed to use that character directly because it's like calling the emperor's name directly. It's irrespectful. Therefore, you have to omit or change it. So, because Guan Yin has the same character as Li Shiming, therefore people shortened it as Guan Yin. In Sanskrit, is Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, a very long name. Therefore, I much prefer Guan Yin Pusa. Pusa is the Chinese word for Bodhisattva. And this Bodhisattva shows up in 西游记 from beginning till the end, all the time. I call this Bodhisattva a she because this is the most common imagery for most Chinese people after Tang Dynasty, where she tends to get sculptured into a woman's form, dressed in this white flowing dress, usually standing on a lotus or a dragon, and then holding this vase that has a long willow branch. The water in her vase supposedly is magical, that can quench any fire or disaster, and then when she comes, she would dabble the water on you and solve your problem. Technically, Buddha and Bodhisattva, they are not humans anymore. They're enlightened beings. They don't have gender. They're not limited to any physical restrictions. They basically have hacked the whole system of universe. You can think about that way. So space, time, form, to them are anything they can manipulate to their will. It's beyond gender. He, she, it does not matter. But then obviously if you're not into Buddhism, you don't know these things, you tend to just call her a she, which I think she would not mind. She's one of the most popular bodhisattvas. And even if you're not into Buddhism, you definitely have heard about her name. This actually has also been mentioned in Buddhism scripture, which is this bodhisattva actually got enlightenment beyond our world. So she is not from Earth, technically speaking. Exactly whether it's another galaxy or another universe, hard to say, equivalent to today's scientific view of the universe, what it is, but she's from another world. But somehow she has really tight connection with Earthlings and Earth beings, so she's often operating here. And although she's a bodhisattva, she's a very ancient bodhisattva. She's actually being a bodhisattva longer than a lot of Buddhas, and she's technically already a Buddha, but it's like voluntarily he does not pick the option to become a Buddha. So remains as a bodhisattva to assist all types of different Buddhas to do her work, and that's her preference. And there are three major other bodhisattvas in Buddhism in China, and I'm not going to go into details about them, but they each have a mountain that's actually physically in China as their Daochang, where they teach it. Supposedly they're still there. So for Guan Yin Pusa, it will be Putuoshan, which is in Zhejiang, and it's an island. In Xi You Ji's world setting, the black bear eventually becomes the guardian for that mountain. So these are the three most important Buddhism characters you'll see in Xi You Ji, and their relationships are like current Buddha, future Buddha, and a bodhisattva who is helping all the Buddhas to do the work. Then let's go to the Taoism world. I know this video is getting long, but it's interesting. In Xi You Ji's setting, the celestial palace where most of the dramas happen, particularly early parts of the book, where the monkey goes up and messes up everything in the celestial palace, you would see Yu Huang Dadi, Jade Emperor, as the emperor sitting on the throne, pretty much like how human world gets structured. And this is, I guess, an easier way for humans to perceive the higher realms. And he is a truly Taoism emperor and still being believed and worshipped in China. But technically, he's not the only emperor. In Buddhism, there are multiple emperors who are sort of in charge of different things. He's just one of the four major emperors. Yet he is the only one that gets most mentioned and functioning as the head of the celestial palace in Xi You Ji setting. But just in Taoism, he's not the only one. Then there is a very major person called the Tai Shang Lao Jun, the guy who has the furnace that actually burned Sun Wukong for 49 days and made him invincible. This Tai Shang Lao Jun figure is really Lao Tzu, the head of Taoism, the creator and founder of Taoism. And supposedly Lao Tzu is his human incarnation in our timeline in ancient China to bring us Dao De Jing and Taoism belief. And he is one of the major three highest level beings in Taoism. So technically he would be even higher than Yu Di, but then in Qi You Ji's world setting, he becomes this revered high level god who still functions in the celestial system to assist the emperor, but he has bigger position technically in Taoism. Then you have a type of lesser important, having lesser power, but really interesting and highly functional gods and deities of Taoism in Xi You Ji, who are called Tu Di Gong. And in the game, it will be the first supernatural beings you encounter. The old guy who comes out of the earth looks like a root of a radish or ginseng. Tu, soil, di, ground. So, 土地 is literally just ground or soil, and Gong is grandpa in a very respective way. The most accurate translation I've seen in English actually is grid keeper, because it literally immediately tells you what it is. Think about the world being gridded into sections of a size of a land, and whoever is in charge of that land, groundkeeper, is 土地公. And 土地公, although they're very small, and often they're just a couple of miles, square miles. If they're super powerful beings living on the land, they don't necessarily can challenge these beings in their powers. But then these beings cannot do anything about them either. They are there to know everything, keep record, and help people. So often you see in Xi You Ji, when Sun Wukong gets to a new place and he doesn't know who is there and what is happening, he would call out the 土地公, and the 土地 will show up and say, oh, I've been living here for 500 years, and there is this monster, and that Yao and that Guai, and this is the relationship between them. If you want to find this person, you have to go that way. They know everything and everyone on the land, although they don't necessarily are the most powerful beings, but they're very useful. When Sun Wukong gets into trouble, he would also call out a lot of other smaller deities and gods, such as 日值公曹, which is a type of god who are in charge of time, daily shift or monthly shift, yearly shift. deities. There are also deities called Liu Ding Liu Jia, which is also in Taoism. They're also referring to years and time. And then there are two very major characters who will show up multiple times, and they're greatly admired and loved. And in other novels, also been mentioned multiple times. But one of them actually also goes into Buddhism a little bit. Here, I will just mention the pure Taoism one, and that would be Yang Jian. Shen. Opening animation of Black Myth Wukong, you see the guy dressed in white jumping off the big statue-like god and then challenges Sun Wukong. He is god of war and he has very colorful background and actually a long history of evolving. But by the time Ming Dynasty comes around and how he ends up in 西游记 and 封神榜, Creation of Gods, he has eventually reached this final version where his surname, his background story kind of gets fully developed. As before that, there's actually other versions. So it's a little bit like Sun Wukong, Yang Jian went through the same process. Without wasting too much time, I'll tell you the finalized version of Yang Jian. Yang Jian is his name, Yang is his surname, Jian is his given name. But he's also often called Yang Erlang. Therefore, he's called Erlang Shen as well, meaning that he's actually the second son. His biological mother is the younger sister of the Jade Emperor. And she ran to human realm and decided to marry a mere mortal whose surname is Yang, therefore gave birth to Yang Jian. So Yang Jian is half human, half deity. And because of what she did, she gets punished and then trapped under a mountain. Somehow Chinese mythology really likes to trap people under mountains. And then Yang Jian grows up and decided to free her mother. He learned all types of very strong powers and then broke the mountain apart and saved the mother. Because he's really strong, also because of his high birth, therefore he has special positions in the Taoism Celestial Palace power structure. He doesn't receive orders from heaven. It's only like if he wants to do it, he does it and nobody can force him. He has a weapon that's called 三尖两刃刀, which is 3 points and 2 blades, and it looks like this. It's a very common type of weapon in ancient China. He also has a dog who is like his hunt called 哮天犬. And often gets painted and described as the breed 中华细犬, the skinny hound dog that's specific and domestic to China and looks epic because it's so skinny. It's very expensive these days to get this breed and very hard to breed, but they look beautiful and they're so unique that they're just like not looking like any other dogs in this world. And in the world of 西游记, Journey to the West, he's gotten sort of fights with Sun Wukong, and it's hard to say exactly who would win. He pretty much has everything that Sun Wukong has as well, maybe different weapons, but in terms of power, equal. So he's very widely loved. And then in the story 封神榜, he has slightly different sort of setup as he has in 西游记. If you've watched last year, 2023 summer movie, Creation of Gods, that character is played by Sha. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Yang Jian in lore is a very handsome man. In movies and television histories, he always gets played by really good-looking actors. Finally, I'll briefly talk about a group of immortals who would show up in 西游记 and also in the game, which are the 28星宿, the 28 constellations. This is to do with astrology, the Chinese version of the Vedic astrology 27 nakshatra. So in Chinese astrology, there's also something very similar to Indian nakshatra Vedic astrology, but it actually talks about different constellations and stars. So the whole idea is based on the moon goes around the earth about 27.3 days, one full circle. So people often round it up to 28. On the different days of the month, the moon would be sitting in the sky with the background of a particular constellation. So over time, people observe that. They divide the heaven into the 28 points and then pick a star among that constellation as the sort of anchor. In Chinese, it's called 星宿. The ancient Chinese started with like 27, but eventually rounded up to 28, whereas Vedic astrology actually started with 28 and then cut one out, and now they use 27. So it's really interesting. Probably have something to do with like how close you are to equators and how many you can see. The 28 constellations gets divided into 4 cardinal directions, and each would have 7. It initially starts with the 28 names of 28 anchoring stars. Then people pair them up with the 7 planets in our solar system. In astrology, they're all called planets. I know, moon and sun is not planets, but in astrology, they're all called planets, heavenly bodies. So, 日月金木水火土, that will be sun, moon, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. Each of the 28 gets paired with one of the planet, and that consists of the first and second character of their name. So if you look at the game third chapter, you have the woman who is the dragon, and she's called Kang, Jing, star. In the English translation, when you fight the boss, Kang is the name of the star. Jing is Venus, which is the paired up planet of the 7 planets. Long is an animal that later people added to all of those 28 stars. For, I guess, easier to remember and then to personalize, they don't repeat. So there are individual animals, real and not real, such as dragon. Long, not real, but then real ones like pig and goat. So you really cannot say why they do it. They just did it in China. And that becomes the third character of all those 28 stars and constellations and constellation gods. Therefore, all of those 28 stars have a name of 3 characters, consists of their star name, their planet name, and an animal name. Somehow the Kang Xiu, the Kang star, which is in the east quadrant, gets paired up with the dragon. In the game, the 28 constellations are based on 28 sculptures in a temple in Shanxi province called Shanxi Yuhuang Miao. Sculptures were made around Yuan dynasty and they're very beautifully done. Work of art in terms of facial expression, details on their clothing, the color. And this game went into the temple and 3D scanned all the real sculptures. Therefore, in the game, all of those star constellation gods you see are actually based on this temple sculpture that you can go and visit today. And that's a lot. But finally, just quickly mentioning the big guy at the beginning animation standing behind the 4 heavenly gods, the really big one, he is Ling Shen. Supposedly actually a water demon in Chinese mythological lore, but very powerful and very big. Therefore, he eventually gets taken in by the heavenly system and becomes Ling Shen, literally means giant spiritual god. Now, we're going to talk about finally the mixture of Buddhism and Taoism gods. They often have a Buddhism origin, but then because they came into China and then getting mixed up with Chinese folk beliefs and mythologies, and they transform slightly so that we have a final version which mixes Buddhism and Taoism together. There's an essential character I mentioned in my first video talking about Wukong. I said I will mention him later. Wukong's 师傅, the teacher. He is a classic blend of Buddhism and Taoism character. His name is a Buddhism character, a real historical figure and a student of Buddha. Buddha had 10 very important students when he was around, and one of them is called Subhuti. This student is well known for being the best one understanding the concept of emptiness. Kong. In Sanskrit, Kong is sunyata, I believe. Therefore, he named his student Wukong, understanding Kong, which is perfect. And in 西游记, he's first mentioned as 须菩提祖师, the ancient master, 须菩提, Subhuti. And then condensed down to 菩提祖师. And Puti in Chinese also is body, which is the body tree and bodhisattva, so it's all linked together. Technically then, Xu Puti is a Buddhism character and a monk under Buddha's teaching, but then in 西游记, he is a Taoism monk-looking guy. So he's a perfect mixture of Buddhism and Taoism. And in the game, he actually shows up in 2 very interesting ways. One is you have to find a crack in the map of the 2nd chapter. You knock on a wall where you fight the Sha Dalang, the big prince of Sha. You enter the crack of the wall and you get to a chest where you can get a very important prop for the later plot. And then you see this big painting on the background, which would be Xu Puti Subhuti teaching all the students in the Taoism monk form, and the front line is a monkey, that's Sun Wukong. The other thing is, if you read the portraits in the game of all the main characters who show up, and you look at 土地公, the 土地 you meet in 1st chapter, the old guy looking like a radish root. There's the story about when he got visited by a mysterious figure who told him, I have somebody who will come here who is connected to me, but I cannot show up directly to teach him. You help me teach this person 2 skills. And then after the 土地公 got that, this mysterious figure disappeared and left a leaf, which has a very lovely scent, which is naturally what body tree would smell like. And the leaf has a very sharp and long tip, which is also what body tree looks like. Then let's mention 2 types of characters to wrap up this video, which would be the 四天王, the 4 heavenly kings, the cardinal direction kings, and Naja. Yeah, believe it or not. I don't believe Naja shows up in the game, but he's so well known that might as well just mention him. First, the 4 directional cardinal heavenly kings. They come from Buddhism. You go to Buddhism temples in China, you will see in the first temple, apart from the Mile Buddha, you usually see the 4 guardians. They are like Dharma protectors. And over time, they get adopted into China's belief system. And they also take on Chinese names. And they slightly shift in terms of their function and image. Supposedly, these 4 kings of 4 directions lives on the level of heaven that's closest to human realm. In the game opening sequence animation, if you look from the Sun Wukong perspective, from his left to his right will be standing the king of the east, Chiguo Tianwang, the king of the west, Guangmu Tianwang, the king of the south, Zengzhang Tianwang, and the king of the north, Duowen Tianwang. And I'll type the original Sanskrit name for them, for people to identify who they are. What they hold in their hand represents who they are, and it shifts slightly from the Buddhism to the current Chinese version of them. So in the Chinese version, the Eastern king would be holding a pipa, a music instrument. And the West king would have a dragon on his arm, whereas classically, originally, I think he's holding a book and a pen. Then the Southern one, in Chinese version, would be holding a saber or a sword. And then the northern one, traditionally in Buddhism actually would be holding a pagoda. But then the Chinese version eventually changed him to holding an umbrella. And that's to do with certain Chinese beliefs of them representing the good weather for agriculture. And the funny thing is, in original beliefs of Buddhism, these 4 kings, the leader of them is the northern king, the guy who holds a pagoda and now holds an umbrella. And he has multiple sons, and one of them is Naja. And that's the origin of Naja, although Naja gets adopted into the Chinese mythology system, and therefore his father becomes Tuota Li Tianwang, a heavenly king named Li Jing. And you can see how this happened, which is there's an origin of Buddhism, heavenly king in the northern direction holding a pagoda, and then it gets adopted into Taoism system, becomes the Li, heavenly king, and the Li, heavenly king, for sure holds a pagoda. So the pagoda now gets taken by the Chinese heavenly king, the original heavenly king of the north direction, now therefore in China holds an umbrella. I know, but it really went down in history like that. So the northern king's son does have a name, also an original form in Buddhism, but then once he gets adopted into Taoism, he becomes the Taoism figure and very popular Naja character who rides on those 2 fiery wheels and have this really cool red ribbon that has magic power, and who killed himself. And this is like a huge parental problem story that if you watch not so long ago the animation of Naja, 魔童降世, which I highly recommend you check out. You'll know the story. And he gets reincarnated and rebuilt by lotus root. So his body is actually lotus root. These are the most important characters, I'd say, in Journey to the West, 西游记, the Buddhism world, the Taoism world, the mixed world, layered upon layers, again, interpretation of mythological characters in history and how they eventually arrive at the point where during 16th century when they get put into this novel, they got put into functions as plot pushers of our story. Not saying this is how actually Taoism in China or Buddhism in China view these characters for real. It is just they get used to tell a story. And that should conclude this really, really long video, and thank you so much for sitting through it. I hope this has been useful for you to figure out who is who and what's their function in the world of 西游记, and making your experience of playing the game Black Myth Wukong a little bit more fun and in-depth. Thank you for watching Avenue X. I'll see you in my next video. Meanwhile, live long and happy game playing.